Over 25 million Muslims come to the Kaaba for the pilgrimages of Hajj and Umrah every year. The pilgrimage of Hajj is one of the 5 pillars of Islam, and a must for any Muslim who can afford it. A Hajj pilgrimage for a family can easily cost tens of thousands of dollars, depending on the country of departure. Thus, many work towards this goal for decades. Some spend the savings of a lifetime, while others sell everything they own to afford this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to see the house of Allah. During the pilgrimage of Hajj, Muslims must wear ritual clothes, walk around the Kaaba and the hills of Safa and Marwa, stone the devil with pebbles, recite Quranic verses, and cut their hair and nails to signify their purification, among other rituals. It is truly a once-in-a-lifetime experience for most of them, if not the most important journey of their life. However, it would be a huge mistake, though, to think that pilgrimages, such as the Hajj, throughout history, were performed solely around the Kaaba of Mecca, and an even bigger mistake to think that Muslims were the only ones to have undertaken such pilgrimages in the history of Arabia. In fact, before the emergence of Islam, many other temples scattered throughout Arabia, similar in shape to the Kaaba of Mecca, and also called Kaaba, served a similar purpose. However, pre-Islamic pilgrimages did not set out with the intention of worshipping Allah, but rather to worship hundreds or even thousands of other gods that you most likely have never heard of. Welcome to pre-Islamic Arabia, to its forgotten history and gods, and to its forgotten Kaabas. Before understanding the other Kaabas, though, we must first understand what was the shape and purpose of the Kaaba in Mecca in pre-Islamic times. The Kaaba in Mecca has changed appearance many times throughout history. In reverse chronological order, in 1627, 3 walls of the Kaaba collapsed due to flash floods. In 930, the Karmatians sacked the Kaaba and stole the Black Stone. In 692, it was bombarded by catapults. In 693, it was damaged by a fire. And during the era of Muhammad, in 603, it was severely damaged by both a fire and a flash flood. In each of these instances, the Kaaba was either partially or entirely rebuilt. We have little information on how much the Kaaba changed in the past 1500 years during each of these reconstructions. However, with the available sources, a rough picture of its beginnings can be drawn. According to the biography of Prophet Muhammad by Ibn Ishaq, as edited by Ibn Hisham, in pre-Islamic times, in its earliest forms, the Kaaba was a rectangular-shaped building with walls the height of a man, made of unmortared stones, a building with only walls and no roof, sunken into a valley of sand. A semicircular wall text next to the Kaaba, called the Hatim, was also part of the original structure, which was, though, excluded with the later reconstructions. The tribe responsible for caring for the Kaaba at that time, the Quraysh tribe, collected money to repair the Kaaba after the fire and the floods of 603. As a result, they reshaped the Kaaba from a rectangular to a cube-shaped building. They raised the height of its walls and elevated the door above ground level to avoid it being obstructed by sand and to prevent thieves from entering too easily. They constructed a wooden roof over the Kaaba for the first time, supported by 6 pillars to prevent rainwater from leaking inside. On the exterior walls of the Kaaba, the Quraysh leaders would reward the best poets by hanging their poetry on the building. Some traditions remained unchanged until today, however. For instance, in the same book, we learned that several centuries earlier, a Yemeni king named Tuba decided to clothe the Kaaba, first with large palm leaves, and later with a more luxurious Yemeni cloth called kiswa. The clothing of the Kaaba is still done to this day. Yemeni King Tuba also placed 2 golden gazelle statues inside the Kaaba, which were later removed. So far, everything may still seem quite familiar to your eyes. Except there's a massive detail that you haven't been told yet. In the same book, in fact, we read, Allah sent His apostle when he was 60 years old, and Mecca at that time was a sanctuary to which the Arabs made pilgrimage, and in which they placed their idols, which they venerated, and to which they sacrificed. And they had 360 idols, statues of gods, which they worshipped. This indicates that there were 360 statues of polytheistic gods inside and surrounding the Kaaba, and that pilgrims already practiced the pilgrimages of Hajj and Umrah before Islam existed. Further on, in the same text, we read about the day Mecca was conquered by Prophet Muhammad. The apostle was standing by the 360 idols with a stick in his hand saying, "The truth has come, and falsehood has passed away." Then he pointed at the idols with his stick, and the idols collapsed on their backs, one after the other. The presence of 360 statues of gods may be a literary exaggeration. What is certain, though, is that many statues of polytheistic gods, made of wood and stone, were found both surrounding the Kaaba and inside of it. Prophet Muhammad ordered them to be smashed and burned that day. Out of the 360 gods, though, one was more important than the rest. The text, in fact, clarifies. The Quraysh had an idol by a well in the middle of the Kaaba called Hubal. Therefore, there was a well in the center, at the bottom of the Kaaba, called Al-Aqsaf, and a statue of a god called Hubal by this well. The text later adds, Hubal was an image in the middle of the Kaaba, indeed the greatest of their images. If anyone wanted to circumcise a boy, or arrange a marriage, or bury a body, or doubted someone's genealogy, or needed to make an important decision, or had a legal argument to clarify, they would go to Hubal with 100 dirhams and a camel for sacrifice. The client would later give them to the priest in charge of an istiqsam, a cleromancy ritual. The priest would sacrifice the animal on top of the well of Al-Aqsaf, let the animal's blood run down into the well, and then drop the offerings such as money, gold, and silver into the well. Once the sacrifice was completed, the priest would invoke Hubal to feast on the offerings and blood as a payment for his judgment. To ascertain the god's decision, the priest would perform a cleromancy ritual with 7 divinity arrows, called belomancy. This involved writing notes on the back of arrows and either throwing the arrows in front of the statue of Hubal or picking them at random from the quiver. The answer from Hubal, the note at the top of the selected arrow, while seemingly based purely on randomness, was deemed divine and final by the Arab polytheists. When the Arab polytheists were not happy with the result, though, they would pay the sacrifice once and once more, until the result turned in their favor. In the biography of Prophet Muhammad by Ibn Ishaq, as edited by Ibn Kathir, we learn that a merchant named Amr bin Luhai once left Mecca for Syria on a business trip. There, he came into contact with some tribes who worshipped stone idols as their gods. They taught him that if he worshipped these idols, the gods within the statues would reward him with rain. It was then that Amr bin Luhai brought the statue of Hubal from Syria to the Kaaba in Mecca. He placed the Hubal on a pedestal in the center of the Kaaba and ordered the people to worship his statue to bring rain to the city of Mecca. Later, as the Arabs noticed their condition did not seem to improve, they followed Amr bin Luhai's example by adding more and more gods to the Kaaba, from Alat to Al-Uzza and Manat, purportedly the 3 daughters of the pre-Islamic Allah, to Kuza, Shams, and Sa'in, among others. The Arabs began piling up dozens and dozens of other stone gods in the Kaaba. After a few decades, these dozens of statues had grown to hundreds, yet nothing about their condition had changed. Mecca was still not receiving what they were hoping for: rain. By contrast, everyone was now very confused about what they were supposed to believe in, and which god was worthy of worship. Was it Hubal? Was it Alat or Manat? Which god should they have worshipped? Religious confusion reached such a critical point that the historian Al-Azraqi, in his book History of Mecca, and the Iranian scholar Al-Tabari, in his book The History of the Prophets and Kings, reported that before Muhammad conquered Mecca and cleansed it of idolatry, the Kaaba contained not only hundreds of idols of polytheistic tribal deities, but also a pair of ram's horns, paintings of Mary holding Jesus, of Abraham holding divinatory arrows like Hubal, some images of trees, and depictions of angels and spirits from all corners of Arabia. Such religious confusion and the strange Arab polytheistic Christian-Jewish mix was having apocalyptic consequences, especially since Arabia was already divided into hundreds of tribes, and the increasing number of gods simply exacerbated their political division. You may well also ask yourself, how did Christianity and Judaism become intermingled in the Kaaba, blending with the Arab polytheistic deities? How did we reach this point? Well, to better understand this, let's examine the geopolitics of the period on the map. The year is 500 AD, a century before Islam would begin its fiery expansion across the world. The most powerful entity in the region, the Roman Empire, has split, and the western part of it has fallen, creating a power vacuum that numerous entities are now eager to fill. The Eastern Roman Empire is desperately striving to recover what has been lost. However, its continuous conflicts with the Sassanid Empire, which have been dragging on for the past centuries, have depleted the emperor's treasury, leading to a general sense of panic. In this conflict, both sides, the Romans and the Sassanids, tried to drag their Arab allies into the conflict. On one side, the Romans supported by the Hassanids, an Arab Christian state. On the other side, the Zoroastrian Sassanids, supported by the Arab polytheistic kingdom of the Latmides. Since the Romans converted to Christianity, many missionaries have been sent far and wide to spread Christianity and to bring in new allies. One of the main targets being the tribes of Arabia, a useful buffer region that, if converted, would have proved decisive in the fight against the Sassanids. The concerted efforts of Roman Christian missionaries led entire regions of northern and central Arabia to adopt Christianity, including many cities of the Hijaz until as far south as Yemen. As if that was not enough, since the Romans defeated the Jews in the Battle of Bar Kokhba and destroyed their temples, persecuting them and leading them out of Judea, Jews have started to escape in all directions, seeking refuge predominantly in Arabia, as Arabia was known to be a region highly tolerant of all religions. The city of Yathrib, modern-day Medina, was said to have a substantial Jewish population, and so was the Jewish presence considerable in many towns of the Hijaz and in Mecca. But what is more curious is that the Himyarite kingdom, the kingdom which was controlling modern-day Yemen, the strongest and wealthiest of the Arabian Peninsula, had fully converted to Judaism exactly 1 century prior. This is very important, because, according to the Atlas of World Population History by demographers Colin McEvedy and Richard Jones, if the population of the Arabian Peninsula was truly between 3 to 4 million, of which half in Yemen alone, Judaism may have been, at one point, the predominant religion of the Arabian Peninsula at large, while Arab polytheism, Christianity, and Zoroastrianism, the prevailing religions of what is modern-day Saudi Arabia. In summary, before the emergence of Islam, Arabia was a melting pot of different religions, in which there were a rapidly decreasing core of Arab polytheists, Arab Christians due to the Roman and Christian missionaries' influence, a Zoroastrian minority of Arabs due to the Sassanid influence, and Jewish Arabs due to the Jewish influence of Jews settling in the region to escape Roman persecution. If the reports by the scholars Al-Azraqi and Al-Tabari are correct, the Kaaba was the ultimate symbol of this religious confusion and anarchy. This period marked a crucial moment for the Arabs as they faced a great dilemma. Should they become Christians or should they become Jews? Which side should they take? And in the interest of which foreign power should they fight? Or, for the first time, should they put aside all their differences and gods to unite as one people, the Arabs, under one God, Allah, against the invaders? The Arabs, led by Muhammad, went for the last choice. This is how geopolitics created Islam. However, there is one more caveat you must be aware of before we discuss the other Kaabas. Paradoxically and surprisingly, the Kaaba of Mecca itself may not have actually been the original object of worship for Meccans and Arabs as a whole. This remains highly speculative, but considering the original purpose of Amr bin Luhai for bringing Hubal from Syria to the Kaaba in Mecca to invoke rain, a crucial element for survival in the desert. The subsequent addition of more statues by the Arabs to the Kaaba to ask for rain seems to suggest that the first object of worship might originally have been something water-related, such as the well at the bottom of the Kaaba, the Al-Aqsaf, on top of which the Kaaba might actually have been constructed later as a cover, probably to protect the water in the well from the sand during sandstorms. However, as the well of Al-Aqsaf dried up and was completely covered during later reconstructions, the main object most likely shifted from the well at the bottom and side of the Kaaba, the Al-Aqsaf, to the nearby well of Zamzam, right next to the Kaaba, where the people were now gathering to collect their daily water supplies. In this transition, the Kaaba too may have lost its original function, evolving from a simple cover for a well into a temple where stone gods were stored and worshipped to bring more water to the land. In fact, in the biography of Prophet Muhammad, as edited by Ibn Kathir, we find a report which states, prior to the appearance of the Zamzam well, Ibn Ishaq and others relate that the city of Mecca had many wells. Ibn Ishaq moreover counted them, named them, and described their locations, as well as those who dug them. Ibn Ishaq also left an important note. The well of Zamzam overshadowed all the other wells of Mecca. Customers preferred to come to this well instead of the others because it was the closest to the Holy Mosque, and because of the superiority of its water over the rest. The report by Ibn Ishaq clearly shows that beneath the surface of Mecca lies an aquifer, which is easily accessible if one digs deep enough to reach it. Therefore, although rain is scarce and the land is mostly rocky and desertic, water can be sourced from below Mecca. This gives us a glimpse over how people lived back then in desertic areas where no permanent rivers exist and rain is scarce, with a well, a pulley, a rope, and a bucket. But for the early Arabs, and continuing into modern Islam, the significance of the Zamzam well extended far beyond the miraculous. It was so revered that we find references such as, "The Messenger of Allah said, 'The best water is Zamzam water. It contains food for nourishment and healing for illnesses.' The sign that differentiates us from the hypocrites is that they do not drink their fill from the Zamzam well." In the biography of Prophet Muhammad, as edited by Ibn Kathir, we also find the story of a man who says, "And there I stayed, O nephew, for 30 days and nights, consuming nothing but water from the Zamzam well. As a result, I gained weight and developed folds of fat on my belly, to the point that there was no evidence on my body that I had gone through starvation." Water was extremely important to pre-Islamic Arabs, and it remained equally important to Arabs when they embraced Islam. And how could it be otherwise? We are talking about a people living in one of the most inhospitable parts of our planet, where the most fundamental element for survival, water, is almost absent. This desire for water is particularly noticeable in the Quran. In fact, one of the most recurrent promises Allah makes to the righteous once they enter heaven is that He will reward them with gardens under which rivers flow. Allah promises these gardens not once, but over 50 times throughout the Quran. The best description of heaven promised to the righteous is that it contains gardens under which rivers of fresh water flow, rivers of milk that never change in taste, rivers of delicious wine to drink, and rivers of pure honey. In heaven, the righteous will also obtain all kinds of fruit and forgiveness from their Lord. This shows us that, for a people like the Arabs living in the desert, having a garden under which water flowed, which is a very small thing, and a normality, let's say, for people who, in the same period, were living in tropical regions, was, on the contrary, for the Arabs, one of their biggest dreams that could come to realization during their earthly existence. The types of gods a civilization worships, and its requests for such gods, almost always reflects what the people in that civilization collectively most desperately need. In the case of Arabs, they were desperately trying to address the lack of water in their land. In fact, since ancient times, the lack of water had driven the pre-Islamic Arabs toward a completely different lifestyle, unlike that of any other people around the world. While most civilizations around the world consisted of farmers working from sunrise to sunset, the Arabs, faced with extremely limited bits of arable land, were forced toward a more nomadic lifestyle from the earliest of times. Consequently, they mostly engaged in transporting goods between empires, typically traveling from sunset to sunrise, under the guidance of the moon to avoid the daytime heat of the desert. To clarify, in the south of Arabia, cargo from India and East Africa was collected in Yemen, placed on the caravans, and then transported through the mountains and deserts of the Hijaz to the Levant. Upon arrival, the ports of Gaza, Tyre, Sidon, and those in Egypt would forward these goods to their final buyers in Europe. Simultaneously, in the north of the Arabian Peninsula, Arabs were facilitating trade from China, India, and Central Asia, bound for Europe via the Silk Road through the Syrian desert. The strategic position of the Arabian Peninsula, situated amidst the mightiest civilizations of the period. On one side, the Romans, and on the other, the Indians and the Chinese, combined with the lack of agricultural land, which did not allow Arabs to stop in one place and create large urban settlements, enabled Arabs to capitalize on their nomadic lifestyle, while also becoming exceptionally wealthy traders. As a consequence, to facilitate trade throughout the millennia, Arab nomads established numerous temples along the trading routes. The best example of this is exactly the temple of the Kaaba in Mecca, located at the center of the incense trade route from Yemen to the Levant. These temples, similar to the Kaaba in Mecca, known as Haram, were built almost exclusively near water sources and surrounded by vast areas of greenery, such as water springs, wells, oases, giant trees, and mangroves. The areas surrounding these temples were declared Hima, inviolable spaces where humans could not pick any fruits, hunt any animals, or commit any evil acts, lest they incur the wrath of the deities. More importantly, these temples provided merchants with places to rest, gather, discuss business, refill their water supplies, and pray to luck and protective deities for a prosperous journey. Most importantly, as each tribe's merchants brought their own gods in the form of stone idols along the journey and placed them within the walls of these temples, like we read in the story of Amr bin Luhai, who brought Hubal to the Kaaba. These temples could have housed dozens or even hundreds of deities at once from all corners of Arabia. This ensured that no tribe wanted to initiate aggression, as they were deterred by the prospect of provoking their own gods who resided within such temples. The early Arab nomadic lifestyle, shaped by a constant roaming of the deserts, either in search of water or for business, could also explain why the pre-Islamic Kaaba in Mecca, whose name literally means cube, is so simple in design compared to the temples of other civilizations from the same period, such as the Egyptians, Greeks, Romans, Chinese, and Indians. These civilizations, thanks to their vast fertile lands, which they could use for agriculture, became mostly sedentary. They settled in one place and developed the land by constructing enormous buildings, supported by well-organized urbanization programs. On the contrary, Arabs could not afford such luxury. The simplicity of the Kaaba best reflects that the Arabs were a civilization always on the move, spending very little on construction and urbanization because, first, they did not really need it, and second, it was not humanly possible for them to improve it significantly either. So, they preferred to ask the gods to solve such issues instead. In fact, if we examine the average housing unit of the regular inhabitants of the ancient city of Al-Ula in Saudi Arabia, temples like the Kaaba in Mecca may not have been very different from a typical house of that period. In fact, besides being so similar to ordinary houses, these temples were also called Bayt, meaning house. However, they were clearly no ordinary houses, so the Arabs specifically called them Bayt Ilah, meaning house of God, similar to how the Kaaba in Mecca today is called Kaaba Baitullah, meaning the cube, house of God. In summary, a Kaaba must be a very simple building, like a house, either rectangular or cubic in shape. It must be constructed either above or near a water source, like wells, water springs, trees, or oases. And it must house numerous idols of gods, made from stone, wood, or depicted in images. Now, what about the other Kaabas? According to the Book of Idols, written by Arab and Muslim historian Hisham ibn al-Kalbi, 1 century prior to Prophet Muhammad's death, there were at least 4 other Kaabas around Arabia, apart from the Kaaba in Mecca, which houses the Black Stone. The Kaaba of Najran, a cubic church of Miaphysite Christians in the middle of an oasis, owned by the tribe of Al-Harith. Ibn al-Kalbi, however, mentions, "I also heard that it was a hall for the poets." The Kaaba of Sindad, a cubic temple built on the Tigris River, owned by the tribe of Yad in Mesopotamia. Ibn al-Kalbi clarifies, "I have, however, heard that this house was not a place of worship. Rather, it was a celebrated edifice." In the biography of Prophet Muhammad, as edited by Ibn Kathir, this temple is also known as the Dul Kabat of Sandad. The Kaaba of Gaiman, where locals venerated a red stone, of which no other information is available. And the Kaaba of Dul Halasa, also known as Al-Abalat, or Kaaba of Yemen, located in the modern-day city of Tabala, which contained a white stone. The temples of the pre-Islamic polytheistic deities, although never explicitly called Kaabas, had similar characteristics to these Kaabas. The goddess Alat was worshipped in the form of a cubic granite white rock in her temple in the city of Taif near Mecca. No information is available about the shape of her temple, but it was commonly called the Garden of the Hijaz, suggesting it could have been erected on top of a very large oasis. The goddess Al-Uzza had her temple in Nahala near Mecca, and it was represented by a cubic rock, surrounded by 3 acacia trees. In the temple of Alat in Palmyra, Syria, Belomancy, the claromancy ritual with divinatory arrows, similar to the one performed in front of the statue of Hubal in the Kaaba of Mecca, was practiced. This indicates that Belomancy may have been the most common claromancy ritual in the temples of Arabia. If that was not enough, Arab polytheists regularly performed the pilgrimages of Hajj and Umrah to such Kaabas and temples. They would clip their nails, shave their hair, mix the hair with cereals to make bread for the deities, and walk 7 times around these temples, naked, in a practice called tawaf. This indicates that in pre-Islamic Arabia, the Kaaba of Mecca was not a unique temple, but likely one among many. As such, it had to compete fiercely with other temples similar in shape and rituals to establish its dominance. As a consequence, when Islam was emerging as the dominant religion of Arabia, Prophet Muhammad quickly sent armies throughout the region to demolish these temples, which he derogatorily called Tawa'id, meaning objects that cross the line, rather than Kaaba. In fact, in the biography of Prophet Muhammad, as edited by Ibn Kathir, it is recorded, "All such houses were destroyed when Islam came. The Messenger of Allah sent armies to each of these palaces to destroy them, and he sent soldiers to their idols who broke them into pieces. Ultimately, nothing remained to rival the Kaaba, and Allah was now worshipped alone without any partners." Assuming the claims of the Arab historian and Muslim scholar Hisham ibn al-Kalbi in his book The Book of Idols are accurate, that the Kaaba of Najran was not a Kaaba, but a hall of poets, and that the Kaaba of Sindad was again not a Kaaba, but a celebrated edifice, the same cannot be said about the Kaaba of Dul Halasa, also called the Kaaba of Yemen. The Kaaba of Dul Halasa was, in fact, the biggest rival of the Kaaba in Mecca. It was identical in shape, and similarly to the Kaaba in Mecca, which contained a black stone, the Kaaba of Dul Halasa contained a white cubic stone, probably quartz. The claromancy ritual with divinatory arrows was also there too, practiced. We don't know if there were any water sources nearby, but it is most likely considering the trend. These 2 Kaabas, the Kaaba of Mecca and the Kaaba of Dul Halasa, were so important to Arabs that, according to the biography of Prophet Muhammad, the Kaaba of Dul Halasa was also called the Southern Yemeni Kaaba, while the Kaaba of Mecca was known as the Northern Syrian or Shami Kaaba. The Kaaba of Yemen was therefore particularly hated by Prophet Muhammad, and thus, in Sahih al-Bukhari, we read, "In the pre-Islamic period of ignorance, there was a house called Dul Halasa, or Al-Ka'aba al-Yamaniyah. The Prophet said to me, 'Won't you relieve me from Dul Halasa?' So I sent out with 150 horsemen, and we demolished it and killed whoever was present there. Then I came to the Prophet and informed him, and he invoked good upon us and on my tribe. When Jarir arrived to the temple of Dul Halasa, he threatened the local priest which was performing divination with arrows, thus saying, "Break the arrows and testify that none has the right to be worshipped except Allah, or else I will chop off your neck." So the man broke the arrows and testified that none had the right to be worshipped except Allah. That day, according to Muslim historical sources, the mission resulted in the death of around 200 people from the tribes who were defending the Kaaba of Dhul Halasa. After overcoming the defenders, Jarir and his men destroyed the idol and set fire to the temple. Cubic-shaped temples are not necessarily a unique trait to Arab history either. Such structures can also be found outside the Arabian Peninsula, predating the emergence of Islam. On the contrary, cube-shaped temples may have been quite common in the broader Middle East before the eradication of idolatry. In Iran, for example, there is the Kaaba of Zoroaster, which is cubic in shape like the Kaaba of Mecca, and dates back to 500 BCE, nearly 1,000 years before the emergence of Islam. Around this temple, Zoroastrians practiced a ritual identical to the Arab Tawaf, called Padiyap Kusti. This raises a fundamental question. Is there any possibility that Iranian Zoroastrianism may have influenced the early Arab tribes to build cubic temples and also to walk around them? If that were not enough, looking further east from Iran into Afghanistan, we find the Buddhist temple of Navavihara, built around 200 AD, 400 years before the emergence of Islam. Arab author Al-Kermani, in the 8th century, writes in the book Kitab al-Buldan that the Navavihara temple during his period was strikingly similar to the Kaaba in Mecca. He notes that the Navavihara temple had a cubic stone in the center, was draped with cloth, and that worshippers walked around the temple and prostrated in front of it, similar to how Muslims performed the Tawaf and how Arab polytheists did before them. Regarding the influence of Zoroastrianism in the region, medieval Muslim writer Al-Mas'udi writes that the early Arabs may have named the Zamzam well after the words Zamzama or Zumazim, terms the pre-Islamic Arabs used to mimic the sound of the murmured, whispered, droning prayers of the Zoroastrian priests called Magi, who prayed in a continuous hum. This suggests that pre-Islamic Arabs might have been quite familiar with Zoroastrian missionaries in their lands who tried to convert them. If we go further east from Iran and Afghanistan into India and South Asia, we find that Arabs and Zoroastrians were not the only ones who walked in circles around their temples. A similar practice to the Arab Tawaf and the Zoroastrian Padiyap Kusti is found in Hinduism, known as Pradakshina, where worshippers walk around a temple 7 times, offer their hair, and wear ritual clothes. This practice is mirrored in Buddhism, referred to as Kora, where worshippers walk around the temple to symbolize harmony, synchronize with the movement of the sun across the sky, and ease the spread of the teachings of the Buddha throughout the universe. This suggests that the practice of the Tawaf, endorsed by the early Arabs, which was carried into modern Islam, into the pilgrimages of Hajj and Umrah, may actually find its origin and belong to a larger geographic trend, a trend that spans from South Asia to Arabia, and that has spread throughout these lands over the course of thousands of years. Clement of Alexandria once wrote, "In ancient times, the Scythians worshipped their swords, the Persians the rivers, and the Arabs the stones." The Kaaba in Mecca has a black stone. The Kaaba of Gaiman has a red stone. The Kaaba of Dhul Halasa has a white stone. The goddesses Alat and Al-Uzza were portrayed by cubic stones. And so were the gods contained in the Kaaba and in the pre-Islamic temples, all made of stones. One question therefore emerges. Why did the Arabs worship stones and walk in circles around them? Archaeologist Uzi Avner from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem notes in his research, Nabatean standing stones and their interpretation, that the worship of sacred stones was prevalent among Semitic-speaking peoples in general, not just among polytheist Arabs. Their worship was mostly directed towards unworked stone blocks with uncommon shapes, a practice technically known as fetishism, which involves attributing supernatural powers to inanimate objects. Among the most commonly worshipped stones were tall monoliths, known as ansab, which literally means to be stood upright. Smaller stones used for prayer in the North Arabian kingdom of Nabatea, called masjida, a term that translates to place of prostration. And duwar, object of circumambulation, stones around which Semitic people performed tawaf. These deities were often represented by freestanding slabs on which faces, especially in Nabatea, and astral symbols, particularly in South Arabia, were drawn. Kingdoms under the influence of Greeks and Romans, such as the Kingdom of Nabatea, also developed statues in human shape, like the statue of the Nabatean god Dul-Shara. Any oddly shaped stones, uncut blocks, rock formations, or meteorites were believed to be inhabited by a spirit or deity. In the Jewish tradition, standing stones are known by the terms matzava and maseba. These maseba were placed on graves to mark the location of the dead and to eternalize the memory of the deceased, or to entrap their souls in such stones. In the Arab tradition, these stones are also known as Baitullah, meaning house of the deity. Worship was not directed at the physical object itself, but at the god or spirit believed to inhabit it. The Semites referred to these objects as Beth-El and introduced them to the Greeks and Romans as Betilus. According to Abdul Muntir in Sirat Rasulallah, every household in the city of Mecca in pre-Islamic times had its own deity in the form of a Betil. Before setting out on a journey, the departing family member would touch the Betil to ensure a safe journey. Upon returning, he or she would kiss or touch the Betil once more as a thank you for the safe return. Furthermore, at the Kaaba in pre-Islamic Mecca, a group of women known as the Sayyida were responsible for weaving and renewing the clothes that adorned the idols in Betils of the Kaaba. Uzi Avner also writes that, whenever a traveler stopped at a place or station to rest and spend the night, he would select 4 stones, choose the finest among these as his god, and use the other 3 to support his cooking pot. In the Book of Idols, Ibn al-Kalbi describes the rituals of pre-Islamic Arabs surrounding such sacred stones, including their animal sacrifices. To attract the attention of the deities, the blood of the animals was spilled on such sacred stones, and Arabs would walk around them several times. Uzi Avner in his research also notes that Betils come in different sizes and groups. Wider and shorter Betils are linked to goddesses, while thin and tall Betils are linked to gods. Moreover, the size and grouping of the Betils indicate not only their gender, but also their role of authority and importance inside of the group. Furthermore, Avner observes an important detail about the stones dedicated to prayer through prostration, known as masjida. While Nabatean standing stones have no specific orientation, in North Arabia, standing stones tend to either point east, where the sun rises, or have their back to a mountain. Thus, when a believer kneels to pray in front of a masjida, he is facing the mountain ahead. During his trip to Indonesia in 1999, Avner states that he found a similar concept of stone orientation in Balinese Hinduism. In Bali, there are many shrines, at least one in every house, and several in every temple, featuring empty thrones, or 3 different types: Tugu, Padmasari, and Padmasana, prepared for an invisible and iconic god. Sometimes a crude standing stone is placed on them. These stones are oriented with their backs to the Gunung Agung, the tallest and most sacred mountain on the island, even when the mountain is not directly visible. Others face with their backs to the second tallest mountain, Batu Karu. This orientation is referred to as Kaja, meaning to the highest. Similar shrines are also found in Hindu villages in Java, he writes. Outside of Uzi Avner's research, parallels in how the ancient Meccans and Balinese similarly treated their stone gods as dolls, feeding, clothing, and praying to them, can also be found in other polytheistic civilizations. The Mesopotamians, such as the Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, among others, built massive mountain-like structures called ziggurats. On top of the ziggurats, temples were built, and inside them, statues of the Mesopotamian gods were worshipped. The priests in these temples atop the ziggurats would cook for the statues of the gods, wash them, dress them in clothes, change their clothes, sing to them, play music, read poetry, fan them with large fans, and pray to them constantly to obtain their favor. To make you understand how exaggerated stone worship was in ancient Mesopotamia, on rare occasions, a marriage between two gods could be organized. For example, let's say between the thunderstorm god Enlil, who resided in the ziggurat of the city of Nippur, and his soon-to-be wife, the goddess Ninlil, who resided in the ziggurat of the city of Kish. To marry these two gods, the priests of the ancient city of Kish would ascend the ziggurat of Kish, take the statue of the goddess Ninlil, transport her by land with the royal army of Nippur, make her ascend the ziggurat of Nippur, and declare the marriage between Enlil and Ninlil with a huge celebration atop the ziggurat. After the ceremonial marriage, the statues of the two gods were placed together in a special chamber within the ziggurat for the honeymoon. This room was large and decorated with all the beauties humanly conceivable. Their seclusion far from human eyes was believed to encourage the two gods to not be shy and to have intercourse, which would, in turn, give rise to many baby gods and bless the land with fertility and abundance. Religiously speaking, this is how gods were born and mythologies written. Politically speaking, by marrying two gods of two different cities, this is how kings signed pacts of peace and alliance with other cities. Before the Iron Age, the Mesopotamians and the ancient Egyptians would often look at the night sky and write on their clay tablets and papyruses about fire coming down from the heavens. They respectively called such fires Anbar and Bianpet, which mean metals of the sky. They would then go to the places where such fires fell on Earth and find stones and pieces of colored glass at the impact sites. These were meteorites, and their impact with the sands often created colorful glass and small stones called impactites. As these meteorites poured from the sky, our ancestors couldn't consider them anything other than an act of divine intervention and gifts from the gods. And they actually were, in a way, gifts. Meteorites often contain iron with a high nickel content, a metal that is easily malleable without breaking. To the Mesopotamians and ancient Egyptians, this metal seemed like an alien, otherworldly, and advanced technology compared to the metals they were then using. At that time, humans hadn't yet discovered how to smelt ore to make iron. They were still using weak, brittle, and heavy metals such as copper, tin, and bronze, which were not very effective for their daily needs compared to the advanced properties of iron from the sky. In fact, it would take both the Mesopotamians and ancient Egyptians at least 2,000 more years to discover how to smelt ore to make iron. So, it should not come as a surprise that, due to its strength, malleability, and extremely low supply, the iron coming down from the sky, also called meteoric iron, and its glass were far more valuable than any amount of silver, gold, or precious gemstones. We could say that, to the Mesopotamians and ancient Egyptians, meteorites contained the pinnacle of technology. Such precious and rare metals obviously ended up in the hands of artisans, who crafted them into artifacts and jewels for kings and pharaohs. In fact, while iron smelting was invented only around 600 BC, the famous iron dagger, found in Tutankhamun's tomb dating to 1330 BC, was made from meteoric iron, and his pectoral featured a scarab carved from desert glass. It is curious to note that the usage of iron in Egypt dates as far back as 3200 BC, with the finding of the meteoric iron beads from Gersey. This proves that for almost 3,000 years before the invention of iron smelting, ancient Egyptians regularly used small amounts of meteoric iron in their artifacts. Artifacts crafted with meteoric iron have also been found in ancient China and Tibet. The Inuit crafted knives and harpoons from the Cape York meteorite. Native Americans crafted beads with meteoric iron, and meteorite fragments were often worshipped by the ancient Hittites and Arabs. The black stone, which is found in the Kaaba, is commonly thought to be a meteorite. However, we lack clear evidence about its origins and composition because no scientific examinations have ever been allowed by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The British Natural History Museum, however, is skeptical and refutes the meteorite hypothesis, suggesting it is most likely a pseudo-meteorite, just a terrestrial rock mistaken for a meteorite. Meteorite or not, Paul Partsch, a 19th century curator of the Austro-Hungarian Imperial Collection of Minerals, published a comprehensive analysis of the Black Stone, in which he noted that in 951 AD, when the Sarmatians stole the Black Stone from the Kaaba and broke it into multiple pieces, observers reported that the pieces of the Black Stone floated on water. This led to the speculation that the Black Stone was actually made of agate, glass, or pumice. The Meccans ultimately had to pay a hefty ransom to receive the Black Stone from the Sarmatians. They brought its pieces back to Mecca, reassembled them with cement, and embedded it back into the Kaaba. Arabs have never allowed anyone or any institution to perform lab examinations on it ever since. The reason why the Arabs may have worshipped stones such as the Black Stone, the White Stone, and the Red Stone in the Kaabas of Mecca, Dul Halasa, and Gaiman respectively, can, to some extent, be explained by the Greek myth of another Betil, the Omphalos stone found in the Oracle of Apollo at Delphi, Greece. According to the myth, Zeus released two eagles from the opposite ends of the world. These eagles met above Delphi, so Zeus dropped a stone from the sky to earth to designate Delphi as the center of the world, literally Omphalos, meaning navel, the navel of the world. In Judaism too, the foundation stone at the peak of the Temple Mount is similarly regarded as the center of the world and the place from which the creation of the world began. Therefore, in some civilizations, the idea of the center of the world is often designated either by a stone or by a meteorite that fell from heaven on God's command to mark the center of the world where it impacted. So, as each civilization saw meteorites falling from the sky, they may have regarded the meteorites they saw as a form of divine intervention from God, declaring the center of their visible world. To be clear, the Islamic tradition never describes the Kaaba or the place of impact of the Black Stone as the center of the world. On the contrary, it is said that Allah dropped the Black Stone to show Abraham and Ishmael where to build the Kaaba, portraying the fall of meteorites as a form of divine guidance. However, it can be said that the Kaaba nonetheless became the spiritual center of the world for Islam, as Muslims, wherever they are located, are expected to face it during prayer. When it comes to the origins of idolatry among pre-Islamic Arabs, according to Islam, over time, people forgot about Allah and started to associate many idols with Him, eventually worshipping the idols instead of Allah. This went to such an extent that they even started piling up hundreds of idols inside His holy house, the Kaaba. According to the biography of Prophet Muhammad, as edited by Ibn Kathir, Ibn Ishaq stated that the first people to practice idolatry were from the tribes of Ishmael, son of Abraham. The text states, "They did so because, as they started to travel outside Mecca, they would always carry with them a stone from the Kaaba to venerate the Kaaba wherever they were marching. Wherever they settled, they would put down the stone and circumambulate it, as they would around the Kaaba. Eventually, they took to worshipping any stone that pleased them, thus reverting to the pagan ways and neglecting the religion they had followed." From this text, we discover that the pagan Arabs' main form of worship was indeed walking around a stone, which is technically called circumambulation, and specifically for the Arabs, tawaf. This practice was so important that in Sahih al-Bukhari we read, "We used to worship stones. When we found a stone superior to the first, we would discard the original in favor of the new one. If no stones were available, we would gather soil, milk a sheep over it, mix the two, and then perform tawaf around it." But why exactly did early Arab polytheists walk around stones? While we have no definitive answer, we can speculate based on similar practices in other cultures. Worshipping an object by walking around it in circles, like the Arabs do around the Kaaba, Hindus around their temples, and Buddhists around theirs, can be seen as drawing a circle. The circle is a universal symbol found in many cultures, representing the concept of infinity, wholeness, the interplay of good and bad, and the cyclical aspects of nature such as life and death. Additionally, walking in circles may emulate the movement of astronomical objects in the sky, the sun, moon, planets, and stars, linking human movement with the cosmos. Anthropologically, African cultures, Native American tribes, and Australian Aboriginals often walked in circles as part of rain-making rituals. Obtaining rain, in fact, was the main reason why Amr bin Luhai brought Hubal to Mecca, and why pagan Arabs consequently placed more and more idols in the Kaaba. These points together suggest that the original purpose of Tawaf may have been similar to a rain-making ritual or rain dance. Walking in circles, in fact, is the simplest form of movement that a group can perform without training, unlike complex dances, making it accessible for everyone and fostering a strong sense of community for those who practice it. Consequently, similar to other cultures, pre-Islamic Arabs may have believed that walking in circles could synchronize them with the universe to hasten the arrival of the rainy season. With the emergence of Islam, the practical reason for obtaining rain may have become obsolete, and the meaning of the Tawaf shifted to centering one's life around Allah, now serving as a rite of purification from sins. Lastly, before we end this video, I want to briefly present the traditions of an Arab Roman emperor, Heliogabalus, who was originally from Syria in 200 AD, because they are quite relevant to our discussion. Heliogabalus attempted to shift the religion of the Romans towards worshipping a god called Elagabal, whose name derives from the Arabic Ilah al-Jabal, meaning God of the Mountain. Lucius Cassius Dio, who wrote about this emperor, recounted that to increase his purity towards Elagabal, Heliogabalus circumcised himself and vowed not to eat pork. He also forced senators to watch as he danced in circles around the altar of Elagabal. Moreover, each summer solstice, he held a festival in honor of Elagabal, during which he placed a black stone on a chariot, decorated with gold and jewels, and personally paraded it through the city. This was 400 years before Islam. For a comprehensive overview of pre-Islamic Arabia, we recommend taking a look at our documentary, The Unbelievable Origins of Islam, From Stone-Preaching Polytheism to Allah. Researching, writing, voiceover, and editing videos like these require a substantial amount of time, effort, and resources. We are a small team of 3, and the YouTube ad revenue falls very short of covering our operational costs. If you find these videos informative and worthwhile, please consider supporting our work through Patreon or with a super thanks here on YouTube. Thank you for watching. We hope we have addressed most of the doubts you may have had about this topic. Congratulations for reaching the end. Lastly, we wish you a wonderful day.